Hello and welcome to Preparing to Read the Tarot. This is the second in my tarot series of videos. I highly recommend that you look at the first video. It's called What the Tarot Means to Me. It's a series of important questions that you need to ask yourself about what do you think the tarot is? What do you think is actually possible with the tarot? How do you intend to use it? And what kind of reader you want to be, what your reading style is, how you see yourself in relation to the person that you're going to be reading for. If it's just personal readings, I think it's still important to establish what you really think is possible with the tarot and how you should interpret the wisdom that you receive. The second thing that I think in preparation for reading the tarot is getting acquainted with symbolism. Now, the easiest thing that you can do is to start with keeping a dream journal. So basically every morning as soon as you wake up, just write down your dreams exactly as you remember them, without trying to interpret them while you're writing. Just at first try to write down exactly every detail what happened without trying to organize it. I know it's hard to do that, but try to kind of just let the unconscious images flow as much as possible just before you try to analyze them. Then, of course, I would try to interpret what they mean to you, what you think the dreams are telling you about where you are in your life right now, or what they're referring to. It could be your current emotional landscape. It could be something in regards to synchronicity. Oftentimes, the dreams that I'll have the night before, they're answers to the questions I have the next day. Or I'll be dreaming a specific thing, and then maybe my husband or my son will say something, and suddenly it kind of makes a connection. And I start to understand what was there in the unconscious. What was, maybe it wasn't just being communicated to me. Maybe it was just there, and I just happened to receive it, and I'm trying to interpret it. But synchronicity actually can be very helpful in that sense, where oftentimes, again, the questions that you have about your dreams can often be answered through just kind of listening throughout the next day and the connections to it. So I would also look up different collective meanings for dream symbols and decide, which ones make more sense to you. But it's really good to get acquainted with more collective meanings for different symbols and archetypes, as well as interpreting the personal meanings to you. So that would be your first step to getting acquainted with symbolism. It would also be a really good step in just kind of getting connected with yourself and your unconscious self. It's a really good way to kind of open up that door and start to have this kind of line of communication. Because again, the tarot itself is a bit like, it's a lot like just kind of trying to understand messages from the unconscious, just like the conscious mind tries to organize, interpret, make sense of, categorize the random images that come from our unconscious. It's very much kind of what we're trying to do with the tarot. Although, of course, the tarot has its own history, its own specific archetypes that are rich in meaning and symbolism. At the same time, the most important thing is what it means to you personally and what it means to whoever you're reading to personally. The actual individual experience is really, really important. So opening up that line of communication, again, is really important. I would also, whichever mythology interests you, or maybe you're more interested in kind of Jungian archetypes, and you want to look into that more, or you're into Greek mythology, whichever mythology, or it could be folk tales from a specific culture, whichever stories, tales you're interested in, I would definitely read about them, delve into them, find out what they meant to those people at that time, and just kind of also definitely alchemical symbols. I would get into alchemical symbols. So just getting acquainted with the language of symbols, because that's very much what tarot is about. It's about reading symbols, and it's also about opening lines of communication with kind of the collective unconscious and archetypes. So that would be the second step. Next, I would work on kind of sharpening your intuition and just becoming more comfortable with it. One book that I really recommend for this is Ellen Dugan's Natural Witchery. That was one of my first kind of witchy books that I got into, and it had this really nifty quiz. It was called a psychic quiz, but it was basically like we have our outer senses, and then we have our inner senses that usually connect to those outer senses. So it was basically a quiz of finding out what are our strongest inner senses, and oftentimes you'll find that one of your inner senses is quite a bit stronger than the rest, or you'll realize that you're more psychic than you thought that you were, that you're far more sensitive than you really paid attention to or gave yourself credit for. So this can kind of establish where your strengths currently lie, and then you can kind of just begin to work in communicating with yourself, with your unconscious self, through those senses more and more, and trusting whether you see it as your higher self, your inner self, whether you see it as God, the universe, the goddess, however you interpret that. More and more it's about creating a bridge between yourself and that kind of more whole and complete part of yourself. So I would definitely work on trusting that part of yourself more and more, whichever senses you need to communicate with it, whether it's through your dreams, whether it's through empathy, which could be strong feelings, whether it's through knowing. Inner knowing is another one of the senses, just this feeling like very strong feeling like you already know the answer to something and you know what the next step is. There's also clairaudience, which is kind of like an inner hearing, where you can just hear a voice that maybe it sounds much louder than the other voices, and it just kind of gives you the answer that you're looking for, or it sounds like your own voice. So inner knowing, empathy, inner hearing, dreams obviously can be very powerful. So these are some of the inner senses, and I would definitely recommend picking up that book, but really just any of these books that help you connect more to your own inner senses is something that I would definitely pick up and begin to study or practice a little bit, and really just not just getting comfortable with your inner senses, but very much getting comfortable with your own intuition, and just kind of letting yourself go with the flow, trust yourself. Because a lot of tarot reading has to do with really just trusting yourself and just saying exactly, kind of like being an open channel and just saying exactly what comes to you, saying exactly what you feel, and just kind of trusting that in that moment it is what this person needs to hear. Because really, through synchronicity, they're always going to draw toward themselves through the cards. Even if you're doing a long distance reading, they are still pulling toward themselves the message that they need to hear. So if you trust that, and you learn to trust yourself, that you are just going to be this open vessel and saying exactly what needs to be said at that time and what is needed, and you trust your intuition more and more, that has a lot to do with doing a reading for another person. Just kind of trusting yourself, going with the flow, and going with your intuition. Of course, I like to ask a lot of questions as well, because I very much want to help the person basically receive the answers that they kind of already know on some level, and to just become more aware of them. So it's definitely about guiding them and making them more aware that the answers are already there. and just kind of being present for that. Another thing, obviously, that would be very helpful is, this is a little bit complicated, but experiencing things from a really aware and centered place. There's a huge difference between perceiving an experience and actively experiencing it. So it's like the difference between sitting in front of an ocean and really being there and really smelling everything and just hearing everything and feeling the peace of being near the ocean, versus you're sitting there and you feel like there's something in the way, like a barrier of sorts, and it's, you may as well be looking at a postcard for all that you feel like you're really there. So what you really need to do is reach that actual experiencing instead of the perceiving. When you're actively experiencing, you're connecting more and more to this intuitive self, really the one that's going to guide you when you're doing readings and really guide you in general. But one way that you can connect to that experiencing is obviously through meditation. There are lots of forms of meditation, and I will definitely cover some in a few future videos, and go over my meditative practices. But really, meditation is, you can do a running meditation, you can do mundane tasks like washing dishes. It's really just about being where you are. Breathing techniques obviously is something that people use. I've heard that people who have trouble with more typical Buddhist type meditation find just doing specific guided breathing techniques to be easier for them if it's really hard for them to just kind of let go. At least concentrating on something like that is a tool. And of course, remember, these are just tools to anchor you in the moment. Once you actually feel like you're in the moment itself, you don't need to keep, holding on to these tools and making yourself practice these tools. Once you feel like you're finally there, you're here, you don't need those tools repeatedly. But whatever tools help you, meditation is really important in successfully reading for other people and for yourself. So I think once you are acquainted with your own inner landscape, with the symbols that speak to you, based on maybe your dreams in your dream journal, or the mythological books that really attract you, or the folktales that attract you, then you can basically pick your first tarot deck. And it's going to be the one that speaks to you. There's so many now, and there's so much beautiful art out there. Just pick whatever speaks to you and really helps you, kind of makes it easy for your intuition to just flow and read the symbols. And when you start reading the cards, I'm definitely going to do another video on actually reading the cards, but when you start reading the cards, remember, the simplest way to see them is as a story, especially in a past, present, future reading, something simple like that. A great way to practice with your brand new deck is to just tell a story each time, so that it becomes kind of like a flowing, intuitive thing. You can just kind of describe what's happening in the first picture, connect it to the next picture, and then connect it to the last picture. So you can say, well, at first, you become aware of the fact that you are living in an illusion. Maybe you realize that the job that you currently have is not really in line with who you are, that you're kind of doing something, going through the motions because you think it's what's expected of you. Then the awareness starts to become more and more powerful. It's something that you can no longer ignore. And because of that, you start to become aware of your mind and how it's so much hindering you and how much it's in the way, and you begin to see how it works, and kind of what's behind it and how it's been controlling you. And this is a really good first step in moving on from where you currently are. See, I just picked up 3 cards and I just told a story. I connected one image to the other to the other. There are decks that are like this. This is the Osho Zen Tarot. There are decks like this that have basically just keywords on the bottom. I actually really like those because the keywords just give you a really quick jumping off point, especially if you've been into metaphysics for a long time, or you've been kind of analyzing your life and kind of trying to understand it and find meaning in it for a long time, and you're familiar with these concepts. These words will instantly kind of just give you all these experiences at once that you can kind of explain and turn into a story. So that is a really good first step with your new deck. Once you find the one that really speaks to you, the one that speaks your language. The Osho Zen Tarot for me is by far my favorite deck because I personally am a huge fan of Osho's works. But yeah, so very simply, describe the first picture, connect it to the next, and connect it to the next. That's it. Just get used to doing that over and over. I would just start with 3 card spreads, and you're just telling a story. Just like the folk tales you would read, just like the mythological tales you would read. Just start by telling a story and let the story flow, and don't overanalyze, and don't analyze yourself, and don't judge yourself. Just let the story flow. It's a really good intuitive exercise so that you can get more and more used to just confidently giving a reading and just making a connection. And that is preparing to read the tarot. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you had any questions, please feel free to leave a comment. And yes, I know it's long overdue. After this, I will definitely be making the actually reading the tarot video. That one's going to be really interesting. We'll talk about a few different decks and reading styles, as well as, of course, layouts and spreads, and how you may choose to interpret them. So till next time, this is Muffet Media, and thank you. Enjoy your day.